Okay, so this is a basic knife skills, how to dice, slice, what we call in the industry mirepoix, celery, onions, and carrots. And I'll show you a couple of cuts with potatoes. First thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have a stable cutting board. Okay, by stable I mean I put a nice wet rag underneath the cutting board, so when I put the cutting board down, it doesn't slide around. I prefer to use a wood cutting board because when you're cutting, these plastic boards that we have tend to dull your knife a little bit. You always want to make sure you have a sharp knife. A knife steel, a sharpener, this does not sharpen your knife. All this does is hone your knife. If you can picture the blade of a knife, if you can look at it under a microscope, it's a bunch of teeth. And as you cut, those teeth become askewed. So what this does is called honing the knife. And what you do is you come down on like a 16-degree angle and you slide the knife back and forth. Again, this does not sharpen the knife. All it does is reline the blade. And then, like I said, if you look underneath this microscope, it's like millions of little teeth. So now that you have that, you have your comfortable knife. We'll start with the onion. Very simple. You're going to cut off the end of the onion on both sides. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut the onion in half. Notice I didn't cut off so much of the onion. I left a little bit of the root end on there. That's going to help us in a minute. When you're going to cut, you want to have a bear claw. Your knife is going to ride on this center finger here. Okay? And when you cut, you're going to push through and then pull back. We're not pressing down. We're not trying to force the knife down. It's just a nice fluid motion of down and back. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to peel off the outer layer of the onion, the skin. And we'll get that off. And I always like to keep a little, what I call a trash bin or a composting bin in front of me when I'm working. So now what we did was we took this ball and we made it so it's not going to roll around on us. I left a little bit of the root end on here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the onion, and you'll notice that there's a bunch of lines going this way on the onion. So for a small dice, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down about 1/4 of an inch. Not all the way through the onion. If you can see, I'm leaving a little bit on the back end. And notice how I'm riding down the middle finger. Okay? Everything's back. My thumb is behind me. There's no chance I'm going to cut myself. Okay? So you go through the whole onion. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a cut down about 1/3 of the way and then 1/3 of the way. Okay? Every once in a while a little bit of the skin gets left behind. That's okay. We'll just take that off. And then the 1/4 inch that I went this way, I'm going to do a 1/4 inch coming this way. And that will leave us with a 1/4 inch dice, or small dice. This is good for your soup preparations. If it calls for a diced onion, this is basically what you're going to use. Now, of course, if you were going to make stock at home, you got a chicken carcass because you roasted a chicken the night before and you want to make a nice chicken stock to put in your fridge, you wouldn't cut it in a small dice. What we do is we cut it in a large dice. It's the same concept, except instead of going 1/4 of an inch, we're going to make the dice a little larger. And instead of doing the 1/3 and 1/3, we're just going to cut it in half. When you make your first cut, that's going to dictate how big your dice is. So if I don't want quite a 1/4 of an inch dice, I want something a little bigger like a large dice, I'm going to come and make, as long as all my cuts here are consistent, you'll have a consistent dice. Then we're just gonna go right down the middle. And then the same, that half, 3/4 of an inch is exactly what I'm doing on this side, a half or 3/4 of an inch, like so. Okay? And then this would be, maybe if you're making a nice stew at home, or you have a leftover chicken carcass, this is something that you would utilize a larger dice for. So what else can we use for onions? Other things we do with onions is sliced onions, sauteed onions for caramelization. And again, we're going to start the same exact way. We're going to cut off the root end and the stem end. We're going to cut it in half. And then we're going to take off the first layer, or second layer, depending on the quality of your onion. This time of year it's hard because nothing is really, everything that's is basically kept in like a dry storage for vegetables this time of year in New England. So, you see how the onions are half going this way? We're not going to make sliced onions going this way. We're going to turn it around as if we're going to do our marks for our 1/4 inch large dice, medium dice. And what we're going to do is we're going to go nice and slow right through the onion. And notice how I'm slicing through the onion. I'm not pushing. It's a downward motion. One fluid motion. And then what you have here is nice thin onions that you can add to a salad. You can caramelize them in a pan and put them on top of your burger. Onion soup. And that's how we slice our onions for toppings and for utilization where you need sliced onion, julienne onion. That's what we're going to do here. Okay, the reason why we like to slice them this way and not this way is because, as you see, when you make that, when we make this cut here, and I'm going to just do one real quick to show you, you can almost see inside the onion where it wants to break down. So what you'll have is a tendency when you're cooking these is that they'll break apart on you. If we do it this way, it's a solid piece of onion and it won't break down on you. So that's how we would take care of our onions. Let's move on to celery. Celery sometimes can be a little difficult to cut. So what I always like to do is I like to take my stalk of celery and I'll cut it in half. And then what I'll do is, usually the knife blade, okay, so if it's super long, you'll cut it into thirds. And then what I like to do is I like to make my first cut into the celery. Now again, we're going to do this small dice here. And then each one of those pieces of celery, depending on the thickness, I'll trim them down and cut them in half. Okay, and I'll just repeat this down this whole piece of celery here. And you will get to a point where you won't have to cut them in half, but for consistency and presentation, we want to try to get them as uniform as possible. And then I'll line them all up. And then again, with my bear claw, I'll make 1/4 inch cuts. And this will give you a consistent look in your soup. And then there we have our nice 1/4 inch dice, or our soup prep, whatever you would need that for. And again, if the recipe calls for a small dice, it'll be about 1/4 inch. If it calls for a medium dice, it'll be about 1/2 inch. If you want to do something, say, different in your stew and you don't want to have all diced vegetables, what I always find is nice, I call it a bias cut. And what I do is I lay the celery out, and I'll turn the celery on about a 45-degree angle for myself. And then I'll take the knife and I'll ride the knife down at about a 45-degree angle, and I'll make cuts. A little bit thicker. And this is something I might throw in a bouillabaisse. It might be something that I throw into my stew. something where I want to see how I cut the vegetables. And then we cut that like that. And that would be called maybe a bias cut. And again, on your presentation, if you're making chow mein, you might want to cut these nice and thin. Okay? And then you would serve that with your onions, and that's basically the start for a chow mein dish if you're going to do that. Next, we're going to work on a carrot. Again, I take all my scraps. This is great in the summertime, springtime, especially this time of year. I'll start collecting all my vegetable scraps at home. And basically, I have a little composter and we throw that in there. It's also good to feed your chickens all this stuff. So we want to small dice this carrot. First thing we want to do is get into a length that is comfortable for you to work with. Okay, and again, we can't cut something that's rolling. So what I like to do is I like just to square up the carrot. And I do that on all four sides. And this will help with the consistency of your small dice that we're working on today. And again, if you can get in here and see that, I'm going to start at about 1/4 inch. And I'm going to cut these to 1/4 inch. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stack them up. And I'm going to make that same 1/4 inch cut. That'll work for now. So basically what we have here is a nice pile of what I like to call matchsticks, which makes for a great vegetable. If you want to saute these with a little butter and dill, they come out great. Even your glazed carrots come out nice with these. And then again, we made a 1/4 inch cut. We made a 1/4 inch cut, and now we're going to make another 1/4 inch cut. And there we have our carrots. We have our celery, which is about 1/4 inch also. And then we have our onions, which is about 1/4 inch. Again, this is great for your start of your soup. When they call for mirepoix in your soup, it's 50% onions, 25% carrots, and 25% celery. And that's basically what you would do. If I was making tomato sauce, I would small dice my carrots, my celery, and my onions for that. The next cut, which is also great for stew, so we talked about a large dice for your stew. We talked about this bias cut for your stew. The next one is called an oblique cut. And how you obtain an oblique cut is you start with a 45-degree cut. Then we're going to turn it a half a turn. And we're going to make another 45-degree cut. Half a turn, 45-degree cut. And you would do this for all your carrots, parsnips, carrots, even daikon. You can, if they're small enough, you can cut them like this. And again, this just makes for a great presentation for vegetables that you want to see when you're eating. And then you have a nice consistently cut vegetable. The other reason you do this oblique cut too is the carrot's smaller on this end and larger on this end. So by getting this cut, we've made all the pieces the same size so they'll cook consistently. And then the last but not least is the potato. This is what I tell all my students at Norwalk Community College to practice on, is to grab a 5-pound bag of potatoes, and then they can practice all the cuts that I give them for an assignment. So we're going to peel our potato. Now when you peel a potato, once we take off the outer skin, they oxidize relatively quickly. So what I like to do is peel all my potatoes, then I'll put them in water, and then I'll cut them and put them back in the water. You should do this even if you're making mashed potatoes. Cut them and put them right into the pot that you're going to cook with some cold water. Always cold water, never hot water. So potatoes kind of semi-round, but we still want to square it up a little bit. Let's give it a quick little rinse. We still kind of want to square it up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my first initial cut to get it all nice and even. Again, if I was doing mashed potatoes, I wouldn't take my time squaring it up and making it nice and even. But the first cut we're going to do is going to be called the French fry cut. And basically it's about a 1/2 inch cut. And then we're going to do a 1/2 inch again. A little bit larger. Okay, so now we have our French fry cut, which we will put in the water until we were ready to fry them in the fryer. But we're going to have stew, right? So I like my potatoes a little bit bigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our potatoes, we're going to stack them up, and then we're going to make another cut. And this will be called the large dice. Then you have a large diced potato, which is nice to put inside your stew. You can see your potato. You can see your nice carrots in there. You have nice onion in there, stuff like that. Now, one last cut. A lot of people will see, we'll do it with the potato also. It's called the julienne. Julienne is basically 2.5 inches long and 1/4 inch in thickness squared. Julienne is great to do with zucchini and squash, eggplant, anything you want to have a nice presentation without creating noodles, vegetable noodles. And we're going to obtain that. I'm going to square this up a little bit. Again, I'm being a little over the top here when we're doing all these dices. You know, I would leave my little bit of ends in there. In a kitchen, in a restaurant, all these scraps we can use. All these potato scraps will go into our mashed potatoes. A lot of the scraps from the onions would go into a 5-gallon bucket, and then that would be for our stocks and our sauces that we need vegetable scraps for. So again, we're going to start, get this about 2.5 inches, make it nice and square, and then we're going to cut a 1/4 inch slice. 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. Same thing right down the pipe. Then we would soak these in water, and then we could fry these up, and these could become pommes frites or anything. Again, if you did it with zucchini, carrot, a little bit of eggplant, did a nice saute with some nice garden vegetables, put a piece of fish over it. It's a nice healthy vegetable and looks great on the plate. I hope this helped you out. If you have any questions on this video, please feel free to give me a call at the club or shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer it for you. Have a great day.